This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Jean Valjean had been imprisoned for 19 agonizing years. His journey through the merciless French penal system had begun with the theft of a loaf of bread, but repeated escape attempts had only served to lengthen his sentence. The day of his release dawned crisp and bright, a stark contrast to the dank gloom of his cell. Valjean squinted against the sunlight, his eyes unaccustomed to its intensity after so long in shadow. The world beyond the prison gates seemed vast and alien, teeming with sights and sounds that overwhelmed his senses. Freedom, Valjean quickly discovered, was a fickle companion. The yellow passport clutched in his calloused hand might as well have been a flashing sign announcing his status as an ex-convict. Doors slammed shut at his approach, faces twisted with disgust and fear. The world recoiled from him like he was a disease, leaving Valjean isolated in a sea of humanity. Days blurred into weeks as he wandered from town to town, each step a battle against the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. Work and shelter remained elusive dreams, always dancing just beyond his reach. The cold indifference of society chipped away at Valjean's spirit, hardening his heart with each rejection. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, Valjean's weary feet carried him into the town of Digne. The cobblestone streets echoed hollowly beneath his threadbare shoes, each step heavier than the last. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and cooking meals, cruel reminders of comforts long denied to him. It was here, in this unremarkable town, that fate intervened. Valjean's path crossed with that of Bishop Myriel, known to all as Monseigneur Bienvenu. The bishop's reputation for kindness preceded him, a warm breeze in the chill of Valjean's existence. When Valjean appeared at the bishop's doorstep, a hulking figure with eyes that burned with mistrust and barely contained rage, the holy man didn't flinch. Instead, he opened his arms wide, his smile as welcoming as a hearth fire on a winter's night. "Come," the bishop said, his voice gentle as a father's caress. "You must be hungry and tired. Let us remedy that." The bishop's home was modest but warm, filled with the rich aroma of fresh bread and stew. Valjean ate ravenously, the first real meal he'd had in years. As night fell, the bishop showed him to a soft bed, a luxury that felt almost painful after years of sleeping on hard stone. But the demons that had taken root in Valjean's soul during his imprisonment were not so easily silenced. As moonlight spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the room, Valjean's gaze fell upon the gleaming silver plates on the sideboard. They seemed to whisper promises of a better life, of escape from the crushing poverty that dogged his every step. His heart raced, palms slick with sweat as he wrestled with temptation. In the end, the hardened criminal won out. With trembling hands, Valjean gathered the silver, its weight a comfort and a curse. He slipped out into the night, the darkness swallowing him whole. Freedom was short-lived. The clinking of the plates in his sack might as well have been alarm bells, for soon the police had him in their iron grip. They dragged him back to the bishop's house, triumph gleaming in their eyes and disgust twisting their faces. What happened next shattered the foundations of Valjean's world. The bishop, instead of condemning him, smiled warmly and said, "Ah, there you are. I'm glad you've returned. But my friend, you forgot the candlesticks. I gave those to you as well." The police, bewildered, had no choice but to release Valjean. As they left, the bishop pulled him aside, his eyes boring into Valjean's soul with an intensity that made him tremble. "My brother," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do not forget, never forget, that you have promised to use this silver to become an honest man." Those words, that act of mercy, crashed through the walls Valjean had built around his heart. He stood there shaking as a war raged within him. The bitterness and anger that had been his constant companions for so long battled against this unexpected kindness, this unearned trust. For hours Valjean wandered the countryside, his mind a tempest of conflicting emotions. The weight of the silver in his pockets was nothing compared to the weight of the bishop's words on his conscience. As dawn broke, painting the world in soft, hopeful light, Valjean fell to his knees in a meadow alive with birdsong and the sweet scent of wildflowers. In that moment, surrounded by nature's quiet beauty, Jean Valjean experienced a profound awakening. The hardened criminal melted away, replaced by a man determined to honor the faith placed in him. With shaking hands, he took out his yellow passport, the symbol of his past, and tore it to shreds. The pieces scattered in the wind, like the last remnants of his old life. Standing up, Valjean squared his shoulders and took a deep breath. The air tasted different now, filled with possibility rather than despair. He was no longer Jean Valjean the convict. He would forge a new identity, build a new life brick by brick. And with every step, every action, he would strive to be worthy of the bishop's trust. As he set out on the road, the rising sun warm on his back, Jean Valjean carried with him not just silver, but a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in decades, it was illuminated by hope. The journey of redemption had begun. Months passed, and whispers began to spread of a mysterious benefactor in a small town to the north. They spoke of a man who had arrived with nothing but the clothes on his back and a handful of silver, yet whose clever innovations had brought prosperity to a dying community. As Jean Valjean stood at the edge of a bustling square, watching workers hurry by with smiles on their faces and coins jingling in their pockets, he allowed himself a small, secret smile. The town of Montreuil-sur-Mer was about to enter a new era, and he would be at its heart. The small town of Montreuil-sur-Mer pulsed with newfound energy. Its streets echoed with the chatter of workers and the melodic clinking of coins, a testament to the prosperity that had taken root. At the heart of this transformation stood Monsieur Madeleine, a man as enigmatic as he was generous. His past remained a mystery, but his present was an open book of innovation and kindness. Madeleine's factory, specializing in black glass trinkets, had become the town's lifeblood. The air around the factory hummed with life. The rhythmic clanking of machinery blended with the murmur of voices, creating a symphony of industry. Inside, rows of workers hunched over their stations, fingers dancing with practiced precision as they crafted delicate ornaments destined for the necks and wrists of Paris's elite. Despite his wealth, Madeleine lived simply. His modest attire stood in stark contrast to the opulence he could have afforded. Instead, his true riches manifested in the good works he performed for the town. New hospitals rose from barren lots, their pristine walls gleaming with promise. Schools, once crumbling, now stood tall and proud, filled with the eager voices of children. The poor, who had once skulked in shadows, found in Madeleine a beacon of hope. Into this thriving community arrived Fantine, her eyes wide with hope and her heart heavy with secrets. She was a vision of beauty, her golden hair cascading down her back like liquid sunshine. Yet beneath her lovely exterior lay a burden that threatened to crush her spirit, the existence of her illegitimate daughter Cosette. Fantine had entrusted her precious child to the care of the Thénardier, innkeepers in Montfermeil. Their honeyed promises of loving care had soothed her worried heart, allowing her to seek work with a clear conscience. Little did she know that her trust was gravely misplaced, for the Thénardier were as cruel as they were greedy, their smiles masking hearts of stone. In Madeleine's factory, Fantine found employment and a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. She worked tirelessly, her nimble fingers crafting trinkets with care, all the while guarding her secret with fierce determination. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and Fantine's world was about to shatter like the very glass she worked with. A spiteful forewoman, her eyes sharp with suspicion, uncovered Fantine's hidden shame. Without Madeleine's knowledge, Fantine was cast out into the cold streets, her dreams of stability crumbling like a house of cards in a gale. As Fantine's world darkened, the Thénardiers' greed grew insatiable. Their letters arrived like carrion birds, each bearing news of Cosette's supposed illnesses or needs, each demanding more money. Fantine, her love for her daughter burning bright amidst her despair, would do anything to keep her child safe and cared for. Desperation drove Fantine to unthinkable acts. Her beautiful hair, once her crown of glory, fell to the scissors, sold for a pittance. Her smile, once radiant, was marred by the loss of her two front teeth, sacrificed to the cruel altar of necessity. Each loss was a wound to her soul, but in her mind's eye she saw Cosette's face, and it gave her strength to endure. The streets of Montreuil-sur-Mer were unforgiving, and as winter's icy fingers gripped the town, Fantine found herself with one last, terrible option. The oldest profession in the world beckoned, a siren's call that promised coins in exchange for dignity. With a heavy heart and tears frozen on her cheeks, Fantine stepped into the shadows of the night. The bitter cold bit into her thin frame as she walked the streets, her eyes hollow with sorrow. Each passing day saw her health deteriorate, her once vibrant spirit dimming like a candle in the wind. Tuberculosis, that merciless thief of breath, took hold of her lungs, each cough a reminder of her mortality. Yet even as her body failed her, Fantine's love for Cosette burned bright, an inextinguishable flame in the darkness of her circumstances. In her fevered dreams, she saw her daughter's face, heard her laughter, felt the warmth of her embrace. It was this love, this unbreakable bond between mother and child, that gave Fantine the strength to face each new day, to endure each fresh humiliation. As she huddled in the cold, her breath forming misty clouds in the frigid air, Fantine clung to the hope of reunion. Someday, somehow, she would hold her Cosette again. This thought, this dream, sustained her through the long, dark nights and the even darker days, a beacon of hope in a world that had shown her little kindness. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Fantine stumbled toward the marketplace, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. As she approached, the bustling sounds of the morning market reached her ears. The clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the shouts of vendors, and the chatter of townsfolk created a symphony of life that seemed to mock her misery. Little did Fantine know that fate was about to take an unexpected turn, and that the marketplace would become the stage for a pivotal moment in her tragic tale. The marketplace of Montreuil-sur-Mer buzzed with life, a cacophony of voices and activity. Townsfolk chattered as cartwheels creaked against the cobblestone streets, creating a symphony of daily life. Suddenly, a heart-wrenching cry pierced the air, silencing the bustling crowd. Fauchelevent, an elderly carter with hands gnarled from years of labor, lay trapped beneath his overturned cart. The weight of the wooden behemoth pressed down on him, threatening to crush the life from his frail body. Onlookers gathered, their faces a canvas of horror and helplessness. Some called out for aid, others wrung their hands in despair, but none dared approach the precarious scene. The air grew thick with tension, the crowd's collective breath held in anticipation. It was then that Monsieur Madeleine, the town's respected mayor, arrived. His presence seemed to part the sea of onlookers, a beacon of hope in the chaos. Without hesitation, Madeleine approached the cart, his eyes fixed on the trapped Fauchelevent. The crowd watched in awe as Madeleine positioned himself, his muscles tensing beneath his modest attire. The air grew still, as if nature itself held its breath. With a grunt of exertion that echoed through the square, Madeleine lifted the heavy cart. The wood groaned in protest, but inch by inch, it rose from the ground. Fauchelevent was quickly pulled to safety, his chest heaving with ragged breaths of relief. The old man's eyes, brimming with gratitude, met Madeleine's, a silent exchange of thanks passing between them. As the dust settled and murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd, one pair of eyes watched the scene with particular interest. Inspector Javert, newly arrived in town, stood at the edge of the square, his gaze sharp and calculating. The feat of strength he had just witnessed stirred something in his memory, like a half-forgotten dream. Javert's mind raced back to his days as a guard in the Toulon prison. The clang of chains and the stench of unwashed bodies seemed to assault his senses once more. He remembered men of extraordinary strength, their muscles honed by years of hard labor. One prisoner in particular stood out in his recollection, Jean Valjean. The resemblance between this respected mayor and the convict he once knew began to gnaw at Javert's conscience like a persistent itch. As the excitement of the rescue faded, Madeleine found himself wandering the streets, his thoughts heavy with the weight of his past. The cobblestones beneath his feet seemed to whisper secrets with each step, reminding him of the life he'd left behind. Fate, it seemed, had more in store for Madeleine that day. A figure, hunched and frail, stumbled into his path. It was Fantine, once a vibrant young woman, now ravaged by illness and despair. Her sunken cheeks and feverish eyes told a story of suffering that pierced Madeleine's heart. As Fantine poured out her tragic tale of love, betrayal, and a daughter left behind, Madeleine felt the burden of responsibility settle upon his shoulders. The weight of it was almost physical, pressing down on him like a leaden cloak. He made a solemn vow to retrieve Cosette and care for both mother and child, his words a balm to Fantine's wounded soul. But fate was not done testing Madeleine's resolve. News reached him of a man named Champmathieu, arrested and about to be condemned as Jean Valjean. The irony of the situation was not lost on Madeleine, who knew all too well the true identity of Jean Valjean. That night, Madeleine paced his modest quarters like a caged animal. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, each sound a reminder of the decision that lay before him. On one side stood his hard-earned peace, his position of respect, and the good he could do for the town. On the other, the face of an innocent man about to suffer for crimes he did not commit. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Madeleine made his decision. With heavy steps but a determined heart, he set out for Arras, where Champmathieu's trial was to take place. The journey seemed to stretch on endlessly, each mile a battle against his own conscience. The courtroom was a sea of faces, all turned towards the accused. Madeleine slipped in unnoticed, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The air was thick with tension, the weight of justice hanging in the balance. As the proceedings reached their climax, he rose, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "I am Jean Valjean," he declared, the words falling like thunderbolts in the stunned silence that followed. With trembling hands, he provided irrefutable evidence of his past, each word another nail in the coffin of the life he had built. As he spoke, he could feel the eyes of Inspector Javert upon him, a mixture of vindication and disbelief etched across the officer's stern features. As Champmathieu was freed and the courtroom erupted into chaos, Jean Valjean, for he was Valjean once more, felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. He had chosen truth over comfort, justice over self-preservation, and though he knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, he faced it with the quiet dignity of a man who had reclaimed his soul. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, the weight of Valjean's confession hanging heavy in the air. As he turned to leave, his mind already racing with thoughts of Fantine and the promises he had yet to keep, a firm hand gripped his shoulder. Valjean turned, his eyes meeting the steely gaze of Inspector Javert. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken tension. What would happen next? The courtroom fell into a stunned silence following Jean Valjean's shocking confession. With a heavy heart weighing upon him, he made his way back to Montreuil-sur-Mer, knowing he had to settle his affairs and bid farewell to the dying Fantine. The air hung thick with sorrow, like a heavy fog, as Valjean entered Fantine's dimly lit room. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil in his soul. Fantine's once vibrant eyes, now dulled by illness, fixed upon him with a mixture of hope and desperation. Each step he took towards her bedside echoed in the quiet chamber, a stark reminder of the gravity of the moment. "Fantine," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion, the weight of his promise heavy on his tongue. "I swear to you I will rescue and care for Cosette. Your daughter will know love and safety." A faint smile graced Fantine's pale lips, peace settling over her features like a gentle blanket. With her last breath, she whispered her daughter's name, her spirit finally finding rest. The room seemed to exhale with her, a collective sigh of release. The moment of tranquility shattered like glass as Javert burst into the room, his thunderous arrival breaking the sacred silence. His eyes blazed with righteous fury, handcuffs glinting menacingly in the dim light. "Jean Valjean, you're under arrest!" he bellowed, his voice filling the small space. Valjean's heart raced, blood pounding in his ears. In a flash of desperation, he leaped through the open window, the cool night air rushing past him as he disappeared into the darkness. Javert's frustrated roar faded behind him, replaced by the sound of his own ragged breathing as he ran, Fantine's final wish burning in his chest like a flame. The journey to Montfermeil was arduous, each step bringing Valjean closer to fulfilling his vow. The bitter wind nipped at his face, and the weight of his promise seemed to make each mile longer. On Christmas Eve, the town appeared before him like a gingerbread village sprung to life, festive lights twinkling in the windows. But amidst the holiday cheer, one little girl's plight stood in stark contrast. In the depths of the Thénardiers' inn, Cosette huddled in a corner, her tiny frame shivering from cold and fear. The rough wood of the floor bit into her skin, a constant reminder of her lowly status. The laughter and warmth from the main room only served to emphasize her isolation. The gap between her ragged appearance and the Thénardiers' well-dressed daughters, Éponine and Azelma, as wide as a chasm. Valjean's search led him to the dark, forbidding forest on the outskirts of town. The trees loomed overhead, their bare branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the moonlight. There, like a fragile woodland creature, he found Cosette struggling with a bucket nearly as big as herself. The sight of her, alone and trembling in the bitter cold, stirred something profound within him, a fierce protectiveness he had never known before. "Child," he called softly, approaching her with gentle steps, careful not to startle her. "Let me help you with that." Cosette's wide eyes, pools of innocence and sorrow, looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope. It was a look that would haunt Valjean for years to come, a silent plea that spoke volumes about the life she had endured. Back at the inn, the negotiations with the Thénardier were tense, the air thick with greed and suspicion. Monsieur Thénardier, a man whose avarice seemed to ooze from every pore, initially balked at the idea of releasing Cosette. His wife, equally rapacious, eyed Valjean's well-made coat with naked desire, her fingers twitching as if already counting the coins it might bring. 1,500 francs, Valjean finally declared, his voice firm and unyielding. The sum hung in the air like a challenge, a test of the Thénardiers' greed versus their suspicion. The couple's eyes widened, a battle of emotions playing across their faces. In the end, the lure of such a substantial amount proved too tempting to resist. With reluctant nods, they agreed to release Cosette into Valjean's care, their eyes never leaving the promised money. As Valjean and Cosette stepped out into the crisp night air, a new chapter of their lives began. The stars overhead seemed to shine a little brighter, as if approving of this unlikely pair. But danger lurked in the shadows, embodied in the relentless pursuit of Javert, a constant threat that hung over them like a storm cloud. Their journey to Paris was a dance of near misses and heart-stopping moments. At a checkpoint, with Javert's men mere feet away, Valjean's quick thinking saved them. He spun a tale of a sick granddaughter, his voice trembling with just the right amount of concern, his hand protectively cradling Cosette's small shoulder. The guards, moved by compassion, waved them through, unaware of the fugitive slipping past their grasp. Paris welcomed them with its maze-like streets and bustling crowds, a perfect hiding place for two souls seeking refuge. They moved from lodging to lodging, always one step ahead of Javert's searching gaze. In quiet moments, Valjean marveled at the small hand clasped in his, the trust in Cosette's eyes both a blessing and a tremendous responsibility that threatened to overwhelm him. Despite the constant threat of discovery, Valjean found himself experiencing the joys and challenges of fatherhood. He delighted in Cosette's first smile, a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds of their precarious existence. Her curiosity about the world around her was infectious, each new discovery a reminder of the innocence he fought to protect. In the privacy of their modest lodgings, Valjean would often watch Cosette sleep, her peaceful face a stark contrast to the turmoil of their circumstances. The soft rise and fall of her chest, the way her small hand curled around the edge of the blanket, filled him with a fierce love he had never known possible. It was in these quiet moments that he felt the full weight of his promise to Fantine and the depth of his growing love for this child who had so unexpectedly become his whole world. As dawn broke over Paris, casting long shadows across their small room, Valjean's keen ears picked up the sound of heavy footsteps in the street below. His heart raced as he recognized the rhythmic march of police boots. Had Javert finally caught up with them? With trembling hands, he gently shook Cosette awake, whispering urgently, "We must go now." As they hurried to gather their meager belongings, a loud knock echoed through the building. Time was running out. Valjean and Cosette found an unexpected sanctuary in the Petit Picpus convent. Their salvation arrived in the form of Fauchelevent, a man whose life Valjean had once saved from a runaway cart in Montreuil-sur-Mer. The convent's imposing stone walls loomed before them, a fortress against the chaos of the outside world. As they approached, the air grew thick with the scent of incense and blooming flowers. The gentle rustling of nuns' habits and the soft murmur of prayers drifted on the breeze, promising a peace that seemed almost too good to be true. Valjean's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. With Fauchelevent's help, he wove a new identity from the threads of his past. The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease as he introduced himself as Ultime Fauchelevent, the gardener's long-lost brother. The words tasted bitter, but the sweetness of safety for Cosette made it worthwhile. Cosette, her eyes wide with wonder, took in the sprawling gardens and echoing corridors. The convent school welcomed her with open arms, and for the first time in her young life, she found herself surrounded by kindness and opportunity. Days melted into years within the convent's timeless embrace. Valjean threw himself into Cosette's upbringing with the fervor of a man given a second chance at life. He watched her grow like a delicate flower, nurtured by the convent's peaceful atmosphere and shielded from the harsh realities that had marked her early years. The seasons changed, painting the convent gardens in an ever-shifting palette of colors. Spring brought a riot of blossoms, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Summer's heat was tempered by the cool stone walls and shady cloisters. Autumn set the trees ablaze with fiery hues, and winter draped a hushed blanket of snow over the grounds. Cosette's laughter, once so rare, now rang out freely in the cloistered courtyards. She blossomed into a young woman of grace and refinement, her education as carefully tended as the roses in the garden. Valjean's heart swelled with pride and love as he watched her transformation. Yet as content as Valjean was in their sanctuary, a nagging thought persisted like a pebble in his shoe. The convent walls, once a blessing, began to feel like a gilded cage. He realized, with a mixture of pride and sorrow, that Cosette's future lay beyond these protective stones. When Cosette stood on the cusp of adulthood, her childhood a fading memory, Valjean made the difficult decision to leave their haven. The thought of returning to the outside world filled him with dread, but he knew it was necessary for Cosette's sake. They settled into a modest house on the Rue Plumet in Paris, a world away from the convent's serenity. The bustle of the city was a stark contrast to their former life. The constant noise of carriages and street vendors, the press of crowds, and the acrid smell of smoke assaulted their senses. Valjean's vigilance never wavered. Every shadow held the potential threat of Javert, every stranger a possible link to his past. He kept Cosette close, allowing only brief forays into the world beyond their home. Their excursions to the Luxembourg Gardens became Cosette's window to a wider world. She drank in the sights and sounds of the city like a parched traveler at an oasis, her eyes sparkling with excitement at each new discovery. Each visit stirred a growing restlessness within her, a yearning for experiences and connections that their secluded life couldn't provide. Valjean watched this change in Cosette with a heart both swelling with love and constricting with fear. Her curiosity about the world beyond their small circle created a gentle but persistent tension between them. As twilight settled over Paris, Valjean often found himself lost in thought, gazing out the window of their home. The city lights flickered like stars, each one a potential future for Cosette. He knew with a bittersweet certainty that the day would come when she would step out into that glittering world, leaving him behind. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Cosette approached Valjean with an unusual request. "Father," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I saw a young man in the gardens today. He looked at me in a way that made my heart flutter. I've never felt anything like it before." Valjean felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath his feet. The moment he had both dreaded and anticipated had arrived. As he struggled to find the right words to respond, a commotion in the street caught their attention. A group of young men marched by, their voices raised in passionate debate about the future of France. Among them, a tall, handsome youth with dark curls caught Cosette's eye, and she gasped softly. Little did they know that this young man, Marius Pontmercy, was about to change their lives forever. Marius Pontmercy stood at a crossroads in his life. The young law student from a wealthy family found himself torn between his Republican beliefs and the expectations of his royalist grandfather, Monsieur Gillenormand. The Gillenormand mansion, once a haven of comfort, now felt like a gilded cage. Every tick of the ornate grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to mock Marius, counting down the moments until he would have to choose between his convictions and his family. The air hung heavy with unspoken words and simmering resentment. Unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere any longer, Marius made a decision that would alter the course of his life. With trembling hands, he packed a small bag with his most essential belongings. Each item he chose felt like a piece of his old life falling away. The streets of Paris embraced Marius as he stepped out into a world of uncertainty. The cobblestones beneath his feet seemed to whisper promises of freedom and adventure. Yet with each step away from his grandfather's house, a knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. His journey led him to the Gorbeau tenement, a decrepit building that loomed against the gray Parisian sky like a crooked tooth. The smell of mold and despair assaulted his senses as he climbed the creaking stairs to his new home. Each step groaned under his weight, as if the very building was protesting his presence. Marius's tiny room was a far cry from the opulence he had left behind. Bare walls stared back at him, and a threadbare mattress lay in the corner like a deflated dream. Yet as he set down his meager possessions, a strange sense of pride swelled in his chest. This was his choice, his path to independence. In the adjacent room lived the Jondrettes, a family whose poverty seemed etched into their very bones. Marius could hear their hushed conversations through the paper-thin walls, their words a constant reminder of the struggle that surrounded him. Little did he know that beneath their assumed name lay a secret that would soon entangle him in a web of intrigue and danger. Days blurred together as Marius immersed himself in his law studies. The scratching of his pen against paper became a lullaby, drowning out the growls of his empty stomach and the whispers of doubt that plagued his mind. But it was in the Luxembourg Gardens where his world truly shifted on its axis. The gardens were an oasis of beauty amidst the grime of the city. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the gravel paths. It was here, among the blooming flowers and rustling trees, that Marius first laid eyes on Cosette. Time seemed to stand still. The chatter of other park-goers faded to a distant hum as Marius's gaze locked onto the vision before him. Cosette's beauty was ethereal, her golden hair catching the sunlight like a halo. Her eyes, deep and mysterious, met his for a brief moment, and Marius felt as if he had been struck by lightning. From that day forward, the Luxembourg Gardens became Marius's sanctuary. He would position himself just so, his heart racing with anticipation as he waited for a glimpse of Cosette. Their silent dance of longing glances and unspoken words became a daily ritual, each encounter leaving Marius more intoxicated than the last. As love bloomed in the garden, a sinister plot was taking root in the shadows of the Gorbeau house. The Jondrettes, or rather the Thénardier, their true identity, hidden behind a veil of deception, were planning a heinous crime. Their target was a kind-hearted benefactor who regularly visited their squalid apartment, bringing a ray of hope into their dismal lives. Marius, his ear pressed against the thin wall separating his room from theirs, found himself an unwitting eavesdropper to their nefarious scheme. His heart pounded in his chest as he listened to the whispered details of their plan. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on him, a moral dilemma that threatened to crush his spirit. Torn between his sense of justice and the fear of involving himself in such dangerous affairs, Marius made the fateful decision to alert the police. Unaware that the intended victim was Cosette's guardian, he set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably change the course of many lives. The day of the planned robbery arrived, the air thick with tension and the promise of violence. Marius watched from the shadows as the kind benefactor, a man he would later know as Jean Valjean, stepped into the Thénardier's trap. Recognition flickered in Valjean's eyes as he faced his old acquaintances, but before the situation could escalate, fate intervened. With the skill of a man who had spent a lifetime evading capture, Valjean slipped away just as the police, led by the relentless Inspector Javert, descended upon the scene. The air crackled with the electricity of near-miss disaster, leaving the Thénardier more desperate than ever, and Marius awash in a sea of conflicting emotions. As the dust settled, Marius found himself adrift in a storm of questions. Who was this mysterious benefactor, and what connection did he have to the angelic creature who had captured his heart? The failed scheme had opened a Pandora's box of mysteries, and Marius knew that his life would never be the same again. Little did Marius know that another set of eyes had been watching him all along. Éponine, the Thénardier daughter, had observed his infatuation with Cosette from afar. Her heart ached with a love she knew would never be returned, yet she found herself compelled to help the man she secretly adored. As night fell over Paris, Éponine made a decision that would set in motion events beyond her wildest imagination. Éponine, the Thénardier's daughter, carried a heavy burden in her heart. She harbored a secret, unrequited love for Marius, yet made the painful decision to help him find Cosette. The cobblestones of Paris echoed with Éponine's footsteps, each one a dull thud that matched the ache in her chest. The city's narrow alleys and bustling streets seemed to close in around her as she led Marius through the labyrinth of the city. The air was thick with the scent of fresh bread and sewage, a stark reminder of the divide between the haves and have-nots. Not much further now, Éponine murmured, her voice barely audible above the city's din. She glanced back at Marius, his eyes alight with anticipation, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Finally, they arrived at the house on Rue Plumet. The modest dwelling stood before them, its facade a tapestry of ivy and shadows. Éponine's heart constricted as she watched Marius's reaction. His breath caught, his eyes widening as he caught sight of Cosette through the iron gates. Cosette, he whispered, the name carried on the breeze like a prayer. From that moment, a clandestine romance blossomed between Marius and Cosette. The garden became their sanctuary, a world apart from the bustling city beyond its walls. Under the cover of night they met, their whispered conversations filled with dreams of a shared future. The rustle of leaves and the soft glow of moonlight bore witness to their growing love. But even as their passion flourished, a shadow loomed. Jean Valjean, Cosette's guardian, grew increasingly anxious. His past, a constant specter, threatened to shatter the peaceful life he had built. Every distant laugh, every creak of a gate, set his nerves on edge. The weight of his secrets pressed down on him, heavier with each passing day. Meanwhile, Paris simmered with discontent. The air crackled with tension, whispers of revolution carried on every breath. Marius found himself drawn into the orbit of the Friends of the ABC, a group of passionate young revolutionaries. The Café Musain became his second home, its dim interior alive with heated debates and grand plans. Marius's heart and mind waged war within him. His love for Cosette pulled him in one direction, while the flames of revolution beckoned him towards another path. The internal struggle showed in the furrow of his brow, the restlessness of his spirit. Valjean, ever watchful, sensed the change in Cosette. Her dreamy smiles and distant gazes spoke of a love he had not anticipated. Fear gripped his heart, not just for their safety, but for the inevitable loss of the daughter he cherished above all else. With trembling hands and a heavy heart, Valjean began to make preparations for their departure to England. Each packed trunk was a dagger to his soul, each whispered arrangement a reminder of the life they were leaving behind. Cosette, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her, lived in a world of newfound joy. Her days were filled with thoughts of Marius, her nights with dreams of a future together. When Valjean spoke of travel, she heard only of adventure, not of flight. In a moment of desperation, Cosette penned a note to Marius. Her hand shook as she wrote of their impending departure, tears blurring the ink on the page. The weight of their separation crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe. For Marius, the note was a death knell to his hopes and dreams. The world, once vibrant with possibility, now seemed dull and lifeless. The revolutionary fervor that had been a flame now became an inferno, consuming all other thoughts. With nothing left to lose, Marius made his choice. If he could not have a life with Cosette, he would give his life for the cause. The barricades called to him, promising glory or oblivion. As night fell over Paris, Marius stood at the edge of the city, his heart torn between love and duty. The distant sound of angry voices and the clatter of weapons being readied filled the air. The streets of Paris were a tinderbox of unrest, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. Tension hung thick in the air, as if the very cobblestones could sense the impending upheaval. Marius took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. With one last glance towards Rue Plumet, he stepped forward into the gathering storm. The streets of Paris were a tinderbox of unrest, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. Tension hung thick in the air, as if the very cobblestones could sense the impending upheaval. General Lamarck's funeral procession wound its way through the narrow streets, a somber river of black cutting through the city. The general, once a beacon of hope for the poor and a thorn in the monarchy's side, now served as the catalyst for revolution. As the cortege passed, whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves, growing louder with each step. Suddenly, a cry tore through the air, sharp as a knife. The crowd surged forward, a human tide breaking against the shores of change. The scent of sweat and fear mingled with the acrid tang of gunpowder, a heady perfume of rebellion. In the eye of the storm stood Enjolras, his golden hair catching the light like a halo. His eyes blazed with a fervor that seemed to set the very air around him alight. When he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a clarion call. "The time has come, my friends," he shouted, his words igniting the hearts of those around him. "We will no longer stand idle while our people suffer." His companions sprang into action, their movements a frenzied dance of purpose. The city transformed before their eyes, as if by some revolutionary magic. Furniture rained from windows, crashing onto the streets below. Paving stones were wrenched from the earth, leaving gaping wounds in the roads. Barricades rose like wooden mountains, a testament to the power of united will. On the Rue de la Chanvrerie, the main stronghold took shape. Marius found himself swept up in the tide, his heart heavy with thoughts of Cosette's impending departure. Yet as he worked alongside his friends, the shared purpose seemed to lighten his burden. His hands, once soft with privilege, grew raw and blistered, each callous a badge of honor in this new world. Workers with hands hardened by toil joined their ranks, their eyes alight with long simmering discontent. Local shopkeepers, fed up with the status quo, added their strength to the cause. The barricade grew, a patchwork monument to their collective dreams. Enjolras moved among them, his presence electric. Hope sparked wherever he went, drawing others to him like moths to a flame. "We fight not just for ourselves," he declared, his voice carrying over the bustle, "but for all those who have been crushed under the boot of tyranny." Across the city, Jean Valjean's world tilted on its axis. Marius's farewell letter to Cosette fell into his hands, the words shattering his hard-won peace. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before him, pressed down like a physical force. To save the man who might take Cosette from him, or to let fate run its course. Love won out over fear. With a heavy heart but resolute spirit, Valjean donned the uniform of a National Guard. The rough fabric against his skin was a constant reminder of the risk he was taking. He set out towards the barricades, determined to protect the young man who had captured his daughter's heart. As twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and golds, a small figure slipped through the lengthening shadows. Éponine, her heart a tangle of unrequited love, had disguised herself as a boy. Her eyes never left Marius as she moved among the rebels, joy and sorrow warring within her with each glimpse of his face. Night fell over Paris like a velvet curtain, bringing with it an eerie calm. At the barricade, the rebels huddled close, sharing whispered words of encouragement. The air was thick with anticipation, fear and hope intermingling like smoke and mist. Enjolras stood atop the barricade, a silhouette against the star-studded sky. "Remember why we fight," he called out, his voice carrying to every corner of their makeshift fortress. "For liberty, for equality, for a future where every person can stand tall and proud." A hush fell over the group, broken only by the sound of distant footsteps growing ever closer. Hearts pounded in unison, hands tightened on weapons, and eyes strained to pierce the darkness. Then, like a clap of thunder, the first shot rang out. The barricade erupted into a flurry of activity, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear. Shouts and screams tore through the night as the battle began in earnest. As bullets whizzed overhead and chaos reigned, the rebels stood firm. They were no longer just individuals, but a single entity, united in their struggle against oppression. Each person at the barricade knew that this night would be etched into history, for better or for worse. The sound of marching feet grew louder, a rhythmic drumbeat of doom. Enjolras' voice rose above the din, rallying his comrades. But as the government forces drew nearer, a terrible realization dawned. The battle at the barricade was about to erupt into a maelstrom of violence, and they were terribly, horribly outnumbered. The battle at the barricade erupted into a maelstrom of chaos. Violence engulfed the rebels as they faced the relentless onslaught of government forces. The air crackled with tension, thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and fear. Gunshots rang out like thunderclaps, each one a potential harbinger of death. Smoke billowed in dense clouds, stinging eyes and choking lungs, creating a hellish landscape of confusion and terror. Amidst this inferno stood the rebels, a ragtag group of students and idealists. Their faces streaked with sweat and grime bore expressions of grim determination. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a human wall against the tide of government troops that threatened to sweep away their fragile defenses. In this chaos, a small figure darted between the barricades with the agility of a street urchin. It was Eponine, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her eyes, wide with a mix of fear and exhilaration, scanned the battlefield frantically. She was searching for one face among the many, Marius. Eponine's love for Marius burned brighter than the fires raging around them. It was a love born of longing and desperation, nurtured in the shadows of poverty and neglect. As she moved, her boy's clothing concealed not just her gender, but the depth of her feelings. Suddenly, time seemed to slow. Eponine's gaze locked onto Marius, his face set in concentration as he reloaded his weapon. In that same moment, she saw a government soldier take aim at him. Without hesitation, without thought for her own safety, Eponine threw herself forward. The crack of the gun was deafening. Eponine felt a searing pain tear through her body, like a red-hot poker driven into her flesh. She stumbled, her vision blurring, aware only of the warmth spreading across her chest. Strong arms caught her as she fell. Through the haze of pain, she looked up to see Marius's face, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Eponine," he gasped, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. With trembling hands, Eponine reached into her coat. Every movement sent waves of agony through her body, but she persevered. She pulled out a letter, crumpled and stained with her blood. "For you," she whispered, her voice growing weaker with each word. "From Cosette. I'm sorry I kept it from you." Marius's eyes widened in surprise, but Eponine wasn't finished. The words she had held back for so long tumbled out in a rush. "I loved you, Marius. I've always loved you." A sad smile played on her lips as the light began to fade from her eyes. "At least, I got to die. In your arms." As Eponine's life slipped away, Marius felt a wave of grief and guilt wash over him. He held her close, tears streaming down his face, even as the battle raged on around them. In that moment, the enormity of her sacrifice hit him like a physical blow. The fighting intensified, each moment more desperate than the last. The rebels' numbers dwindled, brave young men falling like leaves in an autumn storm. Enjolras, their leader, stood tall amidst the chaos, his voice ringing out with unwavering conviction. "Stand firm, my friends. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of France." In the midst of this hellish scene, Jean Valjean moved with purpose. He had infiltrated the barricade, driven by his promise to protect Cosette's beloved Marius. Valjean's strength and marksmanship quickly proved invaluable to the rebels, earning their trust and admiration. When a government spy was captured, Valjean volunteered to execute the man. But in a quiet moment away from prying eyes, he instead set the prisoner free. "Go," Valjean whispered urgently, his eyes darting around to ensure they weren't observed. "And remember that mercy can be found even in the darkest of times." As the night wore on, the situation grew increasingly dire. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Valjean's heart grew heavy as he realized the rebellion was doomed. His eyes scanned the chaos, searching for Marius. "I must find him," he thought, his promise to Cosette burning in his mind. For her, I must save him. In a final devastating assault, the government forces breached the barricade. The scene devolved into a nightmarish frenzy of hand-to-hand combat. Enjolras and his comrades fought to the last, their courage unwavering even in the face of certain death. Valjean spotted Marius, badly wounded and unconscious, about to be overwhelmed by soldiers. With a strength born of desperation, Valjean fought his way to the young man's side. He hoisted Marius onto his back, the weight of the unconscious body feeling like nothing compared to the weight of his promise to Cosette. With the barricade falling and death closing in from all sides, Valjean made a split-second decision. He spotted a sewer grate, partially hidden by debris. It was a desperate gamble, but their only chance of survival. Grunting with effort, Valjean pried open the grate. The stench that wafted up from the darkness below was overwhelming, a miasma of decay and filth. For a moment, Valjean hesitated, the enormity of what he was about to do hitting him. But there was no time for doubt. With a deep breath, he lowered himself and Marius into the pitch-black depths below. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional distant flicker of light from above. Valjean moved slowly, feeling his way along slimy walls, the fetid water sometimes rising to his waist. Every step was a battle against exhaustion and the constant fear of discovery. As he trudged through the filth and darkness, Valjean's mind was filled with thoughts of Cosette. Her smile, her laughter, the light she had brought into his life. It was for her that he endured this ordeal, for her happiness that he fought to save the life of the man she loved. Hours passed like years as Valjean navigated the twisting tunnels. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burned from the foul air. But still he pressed on, driven by a love that transcended his own suffering. In the depths of that underground hell, Jean Valjean's transformation was complete. No longer the bitter ex-convict, nor even the respectable Monsieur Madeleine. He had become something greater, a man willing to sacrifice everything for the happiness of another. As Valjean continued his harrowing journey through the sewers of Paris, carrying the unconscious Marius on his back, he remained unaware of the challenges that still lay ahead. But in that moment, in the darkness and the filth, his love for Cosette burned like a beacon, guiding him forward through the seemingly insurmountable obstacles that stood between them and safety. Exhausted beyond measure, his clothes heavy with filth and his body aching, Valjean finally saw a glimmer of light ahead. Hope surged through him as he stumbled towards what he prayed was an exit. With the last of his strength, he pushed upwards, emerging into the cool night air. But as he took his first breath of fresh air, he realized his ordeal was far from over. The unconscious Marius still clung to life by a thread, and the streets above were far from safe. Jean Valjean emerged from the sewers, his clothes sodden and foul-smelling. On his back, he carried the unconscious form of Marius, a young man whose life hung by a thread. The night air hit Valjean like a slap, cool and crisp compared to the fetid atmosphere of the sewers. His lungs burned as he gulped in fresh oxygen, his muscles screaming under the weight of his precious cargo. The cobblestones beneath his feet seemed to sway and shift, his exhaustion playing tricks on his senses. As he stumbled into the dim light of the Parisian night, the shadows before him coalesced into a familiar, dreaded figure. Inspector Javert stood there, as immovable as a statue, his eyes glinting with the cold light of justice long pursued. The air crackled with tension. Valjean's labored breathing and the distant rumble of the city were the only sounds that dared break the silence. Javert's gaze, unyielding as tempered steel, bore into Valjean's weary face. The inspector had been waiting, a patient predator anticipating his prey. But then something shifted. A flicker of doubt passed across Javert's face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, rough with an emotion Valjean couldn't quite place. "Take him," Javert said, stepping aside. "My carriage is there. Use it." Valjean blinked, certain his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, the carriage was there, its horses stamping impatiently. Not daring to question this unexpected mercy, Valjean staggered forward, every step an agony of effort. He eased Marius into the carriage, the young man's skin pale as moonlight against the dark upholstery. As the horse's hooves clattered on the cobblestones, Valjean cradled Marius, willing life into his battered body. He whispered prayers, promises, pleas, anything to keep death at bay for a few moments longer. The carriage rattled through the streets of Paris, a city still reeling from the failed revolution. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Shadows of barricades loomed in the darkness, silent testaments to shattered dreams and lost lives. Valjean's heart raced, not from exertion, but from fear for Marius's life. The young man's face was as pale as death, his breathing shallow and irregular. Each labored breath seemed like it might be his last, and Valjean found himself counting them, dreading the moment they might stop. At last they arrived at the home of Marius's grandfather. Valjean carried him inside, his voice hoarse as he called for help. The household erupted into chaos, a whirlwind of frantic activity. Servants rushed to fetch a doctor, their feet pounding on polished floors. The old man's cries of anguish echoed through the halls, a haunting counterpoint to the urgent whispers of the household staff. With Marius in safe hands, Valjean slipped away into the night. The cool air caressed his face, a stark contrast to the warmth of the house he'd just left. But he wasn't alone. He could feel Javert's presence, like a shadow dogging his steps through the winding streets. Valjean turned to face his pursuer, their eyes meeting across the distance that separated them. In that moment, a lifetime of chase and evasion hung between them, heavy as a thundercloud. "I'll go with you," Valjean said softly, his voice carrying on the night air. "Just give me time to ensure the boy's safety." Javert stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. This offer of surrender, this act of selflessness, was the final blow to his rigid beliefs. He found himself adrift in a sea of moral ambiguity, with no shore in sight. Unable to arrest Valjean, yet equally unable to let him go, Javert retreated. His steps, usually so sure and purposeful, now faltered and wavered. They led him to the Seine, its dark waters a mirror to the turmoil in his soul. He stood on the parapet of a bridge, the wind whipping at his coat, tugging at him as if urging him towards a fateful decision. Below, the river churned and frothed, as tumultuous as Javert's thoughts. The moonlight caught the crests of the waves, turning them into flashes of silver that seemed to mock his inner darkness. His life's work, his unwavering belief in the absolute nature of law and justice, lay in ruins at his feet. In Valjean's actions, he had seen a redemption he had always believed impossible. Javert closed his eyes, the weight of his shattered worldview pressing down on him like a physical force. The noise of the city faded away, leaving only the rush of the river and the pounding of his own heart. In that moment, he made his choice. With a single step, he plunged into the swirling waters below, choosing oblivion over a world where his understanding of right and wrong no longer held true. As the waters closed over Javert's head, Valjean made his way back to Marius's bedside. The young man lay still, his face ashen, his breathing barely perceptible. Valjean took his hand, feeling the faint flutter of a pulse beneath his fingers. He leaned close, his words a fervent prayer in the quiet room. "Live, Marius. You must live." But as dawn broke over Paris, bathing the city in a pale, unforgiving light, Marius showed no signs of waking. His skin was cool to the touch, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. The doctor's face was grim as he examined the young man, his silence more telling than any words could be. Valjean felt a chill of fear run through him as he realized that despite all his efforts, Marius's fight for survival was far from over. Marius lay in a state of fragile recovery, his body battered and bruised. The grave injuries he had sustained left him teetering on the edge of consciousness. The white walls of his room seemed to pulse and shift, mirroring the ebb and flow of his tenuous grasp on reality. Under the watchful care of his grandfather, Monsieur Gillenormand, with whom he had finally reconciled, Marius began the long and arduous journey back to health. Days blurred into weeks, each moment a hazy landscape of fevered dreams and painful memories. The acrid smell of gunpowder lingered in his nostrils. The deafening roar of cannon fire echoed in his ears, and the anguished cries of his fallen comrades haunted his thoughts. In his more lucid moments, fragments of the barricades would flash before his eyes, vivid and terrifying. Unbeknownst to Marius, It was Jean Valjean who had plucked him from the jaws of death, carrying his broken body through the labyrinthine sewers of Paris. This secret lay hidden, much like the man himself, who now watched from afar as the young man he had saved slowly returned to the land of the living. As strength gradually seeped back into Marius's limbs, so too did the weight of grief settle upon his heart. The ghosts of his friends, Enjolras, Courfeyrac, Gavroche, haunted his waking hours, their faces etched in his memory like fading photographs. Yet amidst this sea of sorrow, a beacon of hope emerged. Cosette. Their reunion was like the first breath of spring after a long, harsh winter. Cosette's presence brought color back to Marius's world, her gentle touch and loving words a balm to his wounded soul. The once somber Gillenormand household filled with a warmth it had long forgotten as their love blossomed openly, no longer constrained by secrecy. "My darling," Marius would whisper, his voice still weak but filled with tenderness. "You are the light that guides me back from the darkness." Cosette, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears, would simply hold him close, her heart overflowing with a mixture of joy and relief. Their shared grief over the recent tragic events only served to deepen their bond, like two saplings intertwining as they reached for the sun. As Marius regained his strength, the inevitable topic of marriage arose. Both families, seeing the depth of the young couple's love, gave their blessing without hesitation. The engagement was a moment of pure elation, a bright spot in the aftermath of so much pain and loss. Yet as Marius and Cosette's happiness grew, Jean Valjean found himself retreating further into the shadows. Like a ship slowly drifting away from shore, he began to distance himself from the life he had built with Cosette. The weight of his past pressed down upon him, a constant reminder of the shame he feared would taint Cosette's future if the truth were known. The wedding day arrived, a spectacle of joy and celebration. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers and the melodious sound of laughter. Cosette, radiant in her white gown, was a vision of beauty that took Marius's breath away. As they exchanged vows, their eyes locked in a gaze of pure love and promise, the world around them seemed to fade away. Valjean watched from the periphery, his heart swelling with pride and breaking with sorrow in equal measure. As the festivities continued, he slipped away unnoticed, like a ghost fading into the mist. His absence left an inexplicable void in Cosette's heart, a shadow on her perfect day that she couldn't quite understand. In the days that followed, Marius found himself grappling with conflicting emotions regarding Valjean. Fragments of information about the older man's past had reached his ears, planting seeds of suspicion in his mind. Ignorant of Valjean's role in his rescue and blinded by these half-truths, Marius began to distance himself and Cosette from the man who had been her guardian for so long. This misunderstanding, born of partial knowledge and misplaced caution, cast a pall over the newlyweds' happiness. Cosette, now Baroness Pontmercy, found herself torn between her new life with Marius and the inexplicable absence of the man who had raised her with such devotion. "Marius," she would ask, her voice tinged with worry, "why does my father no longer visit? Have we done something to offend him?" Marius, struggling with his own doubts and unable to voice his suspicions, would deflect her questions, leaving Cosette to wrestle with her confusion and hurt alone. The unresolved tension hung in the air of their new home like an unseen specter, a constant reminder of the man whose absence left a void in their lives. As the days passed, Cosette found herself gazing out of windows, her thoughts drifting to the father she missed so dearly. She struggled to reconcile her new life of luxury and love with the loss of the man who had been her anchor for so long. The happiness she shared with Marius was real and deep, but it was tinged with a melancholy she couldn't shake, like a beautiful melody played in a minor key. Meanwhile, Jean Valjean, alone in his modest lodgings, wrestled with a decision that would change everything. His weathered hands trembled as he penned a letter, each word heavy with the weight of his past. As night fell, he looked out at the twinkling lights of Paris, his resolve hardening. Tomorrow he would confront Marius with the truth, even if it meant losing Cosette forever. The clock struck midnight, marking the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. Jean Valjean knew the time had come to unveil the truth to Marius. He had to reveal his past before stepping out of Cosette's life forever. The streets of Paris seemed to close in around him as he walked, each cobblestone a reminder of the long and winding path that had led him to this moment. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked stone and the distant aroma of freshly baked bread, a cruel reminder of the simple joys he would soon leave behind. His heart pounded in his chest, a relentless drumbeat matching the rhythm of his footsteps. The weight of his past pressed down on his shoulders, threatening to bring him to his knees with each step. As he approached Marius's residence, the world around him seemed to blur, leaving only the door before him in sharp focus. Marius greeted him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, his young face etched with worry. Valjean's voice trembled as he began to speak, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. He told of the years in prison, the bitterness that had consumed him, and the transformative power of kindness that had set him on a new path. As Valjean's tale unfolded, Marius's expression shifted like clouds across a stormy sky. Shock gave way to disbelief, and finally settled into a cold, hard judgment. The warmth in the young man's eyes cooled, replaced by a glint of fear and revulsion. When Valjean finished, the silence that fell between them was as thick and suffocating as the walls of Toulon prison. Marius's words, when they came, cut through the air like a knife. "You must never see Cosette again," he declared, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of an irrevocable sentence. "For her sake, for her reputation, you must disappear." Valjean nodded, accepting this final sacrifice with a mixture of resignation and heartbreak. As he left Marius's home, the world seemed to lose its color, fading to shades of gray. He felt as if he were walking away from the last glimmer of light in his world, each step taking him further into darkness. In the days that followed, Valjean retreated to a humble lodging, a shadow of his former self. His body, once strong enough to lift a cart off a man, now seemed to wither like a flower deprived of sunlight. The room was sparse, with only a bed and a small table, mirroring the emptiness he felt within. Without Cosette, without purpose, he felt his life force ebbing away, as surely as sand through an hourglass. But fate, it seemed, had one last twist in store. Thénardier, that cunning fox of the Parisian underworld, slithered into Marius's life with blackmail on his mind. His eyes glinted with malice as he spoke, thinking he was destroying Valjean's reputation further. Instead, his words painted a vivid picture of Valjean's incredible bravery. Marius listened, stunned, as Thénardier unwittingly described the harrowing journey through the sewers. He spoke of Valjean's body straining under the weight of an unconscious Marius, of the determination that had driven him through the filth and darkness. With each word, Marius's world tilted on its axis, the truth of his misjudgment hitting him like a physical blow. Filled with a desperate urgency, Marius rushed to find Cosette. Together they raced through the streets of Paris, their hearts pounding in unison with the rhythm of their footsteps. The city blurred around them, a kaleidoscope of sights and sounds as they searched, fear growing with each passing moment. When they finally reached Valjean's lodging, the scene that greeted them was one of quiet despair. Valjean lay in his bed, a frail shadow of the man he once was. The room was dim, lit only by a single candle that cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. Yet his eyes, when they fell upon Cosette, lit up like the last flare of a dying star. In those final, precious moments, the truth flowed between them like a river breaking through a dam. Cosette learned of her origins, of the depth of Valjean's love and sacrifice. Tears streamed down her face as she grasped the enormity of what this man had done for her, each drop a testament to the love that had shaped her life. Marius, overcome with remorse, fell to his knees beside the bed. "Forgive me," he pleaded, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't understand. I didn't know." The words seemed inadequate in the face of Valjean's sacrifice, but they were all he had to offer. Valjean's smile was gentle, forgiving. He reached out with trembling hands to bless the young couple, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a lifetime of love and wisdom. The touch of his hand was light, but it carried the weight of years of protection and care. As the light began to fade from his eyes, Valjean felt a peace settle over him. The journey that had begun in bitterness and despair was ending in love and redemption. With his last breath, he gazed at Cosette, seeing in her face the promise of a future filled with happiness and love. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of all the good he had managed to bring into the world. And so Jean Valjean passed from this world, his lifelong quest for redemption and love fulfilled. In the quiet of that humble room, surrounded by those he loved most, he found at last the serenity that had eluded him for so long. The candle flickered, casting a warm glow over the scene, as if nature itself was acknowledging the passing of a truly good man. His legacy of compassion and the enduring power of transformation would live on, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a man who had learned to love in the face of unimaginable adversity. As Cosette and Marius held each other, their tears mingling, they knew that their lives had been forever changed by the love of Jean Valjean. In the streets outside, Paris continued its endless dance of life, unaware that one of its greatest, most unsung heroes had just bid his final farewell.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.